Hey guys, Reilious here, and welcome to Reilious' world. Today, we're doing something a little bit different from what we did, or what we normally do, and we're talking with other people for once. Today's episode is related to a server of games that I call the National Games. I have two people here with me today who are pretty important in this server, in at least the last game we had. Would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
I can go first.
Yep.
Hi, my name is Turch, or I go by Turch in Discord. I played Brazil in the fifth game of National Games, and I also played Delta in the 8th and 9th game, which was one of the main factions. And
And I go by Pseudonycat or Pseudo. And I've played many nations because I have a record of killing off nations by stupidity and chaos. But my winning nation, and from the last game, is the Arkansas Academia. And another honorable mention is Candyland or the Candy Kingdom.
Alright. And I don't play a nation. I'm the advisor, the all powerful, and all that jazz. So, what are you guys' favorite parts about the first game that you played? Church, would you like to go first?
yeah, sure. If I remember well, my first game was either G5 or G6. I don't really remember right now. I think it was G5.
Mm-hmm.
My favorite part was because I could play my own country. I'm from Brazil, in real life, and I could play Brazil in G5. So I really, I never saw myself in playing some sort of geopolitical role play. I was not really interested in that sort of game. But since Rayo is my friend and all, and he made a server about it, I gave it a try, and really I could enjoy the leading a nation with Rayo telling me what to do and all. It was pretty fun.
Mm-hmm. And Pseudo?
Yeah, I definitely agree with Turch in that regard. My first nation was Appalachia, in G7. And I never dabbled in geopolitical roleplay, as Turch said, but playing and seeing that the possibilities were endless, like of course bounded by physical restrictions. Um, it was kind of amazing, because everything's real time and you don't have to wait as long as you would have in another kind of setting for roleplay, say in Minecraft or something like that. And it was the first time I tried a Discord roleplay server, so it was really fantastic for me.
Nice. And more recently, Game 9 has just ended, which was Earth 2500, which was basically well, it was the fourth installment to the Earth series. Game 5 being Earth in 2019, Game 7, American Regions, which took place in 2020. There were no viruses involved in this one because, we all know how that goes with America. Uh, Game 8, which took place in the year 2282, in the middle of a nuclear apocalypse. And then Game 9, as I've said, was 2500. Recently, 2500 ended with a final battle with an Earth-eating monster created by aliens, where these two ended up battling it to the death and causing potential structural harm to the Earth. But we're not going to focus on that yet, because I haven't planned out if that's going to be bad or not. So what were you guys' favorite part of Game 9?
Well, do nations start are passive in Leo was really neutral in engagements with Egypt. So it was similar with Delta, which was my when it has to do with the allies, and their focus was making cures for the viruses and taking care of the immigrants. So my favorite part was being able to make a sort of utopia. Like Delta had the problems, of course, but they were far ahead from any nation. Fun because I could make what I always liked in like servers, but wouldn't follow the rules of Korean's technology.
Right.
Um,
Okay, Turch. This question is for you since you've been in more games than Pseudo here. With Game 7 specifically, what did you think of with how, like, basically the ending of Game 7? If you don't remember, it was the first American regions where basically the Republic of the Pacific tried basically unifying the United States. There was that whole issue with New England. Appalachia froze itself over before being nuked a
Well,
few times.
yeah, it's working. So I didn't take part in G7. I was really inactive in the server for a small period, but I was checking out the game for some background because I was going to take part in
Oh yeah,
G8.
that's right.
So I took a check in the previous game in the storyline, and I think it's pretty interesting because
Hmm.
Delta, which is my faction, and the Republic of Pacific, they had some sort of they were enemies for a small for some time in the games. They had their relation of love and hate of sorts, like Delta helped Republic, Republic helped Delta. Sometimes they had conflicts. So I think it was interesting to know that Rob, which was the name of Republic, had already, they were the reason why
Hmm.
J7 had that end and why it became the G8 we know. And I think Delta was similar because in G9 and G8 they had the most, like, they were one of the nations with most importance in the plot. So I really like it because it kind of means I and the others could mold the history with what we did.
Hmm. And Pseudo. Something for those who don't know, Pseudo here really likes having a lot of magic and, for lack of a better word for it, interesting inventions in his games. What is one of your favorite ones that actually ended up being built, and one that you would hope would have been built but never was?
um, of course, there's the mind control, uh, mind control freeze machine extravaganza in G7, uh, which caused the whole Appalachia thing. Um, and my goal was to have trick tourists with mind control into spending more. But of course, the machine had to cut fire, and of course, I had to use my freezing machine to freeze it because that's how it works. Um, but things got out of hand, and suddenly I'm in a war, and people want to nuke me. And I just wanted to freeze my poor machine. So yeah, that's one of my favorite projects. But there's also in G9. Um, I really wanted a multiverse portal, but Real never allowed it to happen. uh, and my ultimate project, the one that is never completed, but I always try to do it, is my force field tech. Because force fields, of course, if I can shield myself with magic and energy, why wouldn't I do it? But it never happens. because it takes too long because it doesn't exist. So that's
Yeah.
that's my pain.
Yeah. Um. Okay, so the national games are really, 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 I guess, good at starting wars. To None of this is scripted, so I have no idea what I'm saying half the time. But anyway, people like to fight. So, what are you guys' favorite wars that you participated in?
I think Delta took part in most wars, especially the plot relevant wars. I would say my favorite war was the final one of G8 of the Hellfire event, where we
Hmm.
fought against Prime. But I believe the war against the Republic of Pacific in G9 and G8, they were both very important so I could develop what I had in mind for Delta. A nation that was neutral, but if they mess with Delta, they would get destroyed. That's what happened with Republic of Pacific. So I think these conflicts with Republic and other nations made very clear what I wanted my nation's personality
Hmm.
kind of to be.
And Pseudo?
And for me, by the time my favorite war happened, which was the 20-minute war in G9, I had learned my lesson about wars, and that is, do not take part of them because you will die. Um, but seeing as how Candelang was being threatened by the Enclave, um, I my war instinct took over me, and I had to participate in that war, ignoring all my previous experiences with war. Um, and suddenly Delta joins, which is Turch's faction. And suddenly it's Delta, this huge ass faction, against poor little Enclave, which just wanted Candyland, which was a minuscule piece of land.
Hmm.
And the roles didn't help either. Um, so with the and I hadn't in my imagination I hadn't developed any weapons because I was a nation of librarians. Um, so I basically launched a cargo rocket, which was being used for my space station, and dropped it on their poor oil rig, which ended the war.
Hmm. Speaking of
I,
roles, oh, sorry.
I really like how whenever Delta does something, everybody's like, "Oh God, oh fuck, there is here." Because every conflict I took part in, it was like just watching it until someone got weak, and then it was like, "Hey, do you want help?"
Yeah, yeah, that was pretty common. And that's probably why you got territory all over the place half the time. Then the magical world of Border Gore. Um, but also speaking of rolling's a pretty big part of national games with how it's basically how you interact with most nations, and it creates like a bias-free sort of environment for whenever you have inventions or testing things. So I don't accidentally make somebody really successful and then somebody else is just absolutely sucking at every single thing they try to do. Sometimes that happens anyway with roles. I don't know why. But anyway, what is the best thing and the worst thing that you guys have ever had for roles, if you remember?
Okay, so my worst role was not in your game; it was in Erika's game, where I tried to take a dragon's egg and I got a tree or something, and the dragon just burnt my man to the ground.
Oh, well,
And
that's fun.
my best role, I think, was during the final conflict with Republic, with the laser, where they just
Hmm.
tried to nuke the moon. So I went, okay, bye, and just burned them to the. It was pretty funny. It was nice.
Yeah. And Pseudo?
For me, it happens to me that sometimes I do really imaginative stuff or basically bullshit stuff, which shouldn't work, but against real wishes, it does because I roll high.
Yeah.
and and so it happens that I infuse the soul of somebody into this alien ship, or I manage to launch it. This was a honorable mention since I rolled an at 20 with launching this buried ship in the ground off into wherever, which caused the whole basically ending of the world before we stopped it. And my worst rolls is basically coming back to G7, the poor mind control and freezing machine subject,
Yeah.
where it should have worked, but it didn't because of bad rolls.
Yeah. Speaking of the ending of the world, I would say which one, but we all know which one since we've all been in that game. Um, in the national games, well, specifically the Earth series, there have been multiple end of the world scenarios that could have happened, or that probably would have happened in real life, but because it's a game, I said no to some parts of realism. In Game 5, it sort of kind of died off a little bit with popularity, so it just kind of ended. But a pretty good ending, I would say, that could have been an ending was the battle between basically the world and the Egyptian Empire. This battle caused basically all of North Africa to just completely be nuclear fallout, and there's also a virus that was made by the or not the Republic of the Pacific, the same person, but made by the Egyptian Empire that backfired. In between that and the nuclear holocaust, basically, the entire north of Africa was completely uninhabitable. Um, in Game 7, after everybody had started making robots and everything, the rise of Prime came towards the end of the game without people really looking into it because it was supposed to be like the secret project of the United Confederation of Great Britain, and since the United States in Game 5, towards the end anyway, had become a puppet to them, it then fell after 2020. So they wanted to try to take control over it again because of it trying to fight back against them so hard. So, towards the end, the beginning of the Hellfire event occurred, as mentioned before, where Prime, which is a military division of the UCGB, um, basically hacked into every single robot created by the players in Game 7. And there was a lot of stuff going on at once, and if you were to look into the channels in Game 7, all of them are just absolutely full of just full of panic. It was kind of fun, but also kind of stressful because I had to manage all the panic all at once with multiple people, and like having to switch in between channels all over the place. But uh, long story short, Game 7 ended with uh, all the robots turning against people, like in Terminator, and then basically the entirety of the United States nuclear arsenal launching all at once to bomb the United States. Which, in real life, that's more than enough to destroy humanity as a whole. Because it only takes, if I remember right, but I might be wrong, it only takes about 100 nuclear bombs to wipe out humanity as we know it. And there were 2,500 nuclear bombs in the United States arsenal, last I knew, with research. And that would have gone up to about 5,000 if one of the bombs had hit a storage facility, which, if I remember right, holds 3,500. All this I've looked up a while ago, so I could be wrong on all these numbers. But anyway, that was fun. And then that led into Game 8, which, as said before, was the apocalypse. Game 8's finale was everybody working together for the first time in the whole game, but it was mostly just the same three people that caused basically the most trouble in these games. Turch, LW, who plays the Republic of the Pacific, and Clyde, who plays the RNX Sovereignty. They banded together with roughly, I want to say, 30,000 other people that are mostly NPCs and their own civilians, and marched east to Washington, D.C. to fight Prime in its homeland. Well, sort of its homeland, but it's the closest they could get, because they couldn't really get across the ocean at that time. But after about, I want to say it was 4 hours, correct me if I'm wrong, Turch, but it was a good long time for
I
a
think it was
couple nights.
5.
5? Yeah. Well, it was a long time. Long story. I say long story short a lot. But it was a long time of a whole battle. And it was also the first time I tried using traditional roleplay with how battles go, which so far with 8 and 9 seemed like they're going well. Would you guys agree?
Yeah.
Yeah, same, yeah.
So that I was told was a really long, or not really long, but really good, especially by Turch, because he was really hyped up afterwards. There's a lot of nationalism for Delta with Turch. A lot more than really anybody else with their own nations. Um,
I
what
think
do
the
you guys think?
nationalism I think the
Hmm?
nationalism of Delta is mostly because I didn't make nations in your game for a small period. I think it was like 1 to 2 games. I didn't participate. I was just
Hmm.
only G7. I don't really remember now. But like normally when I
I don't
make
think you
nations,
participated in 6,
yeah, I think I
because
didn't.
6 wasn't too popular.
Normally when I make nations, I try to think of a small sort of personality for them. Like, of course, a nation won't have a personality, but I mean, like, when
Hmm.
we be as leaders, I try to think of something that would represent the nation. And I think Delta's representation was mostly technology. We didn't really invest in a lot of war. Like, they had a lot of war equipment, like robots and clones and all. But my main focus was making defenses and expanding, like getting oil, resources, moving out of the planet. I was trying to explore and enjoy the game as much as I could, but even like I don't really care about war. I only go to war when it's like very necessary, like someone attacked me or occupied my territory or did something wrong. So I think Delta took the role of savior of the game in the sense of I was attempting to work with like protecting the nations which are weaker, making sure the other nations don't get hurt and all. And I really like the game.
Yeah. Any thoughts from you, Pseudo?
What was the question?
Well, I was just kind of explaining all the final battles and things like that, so really anything's on the board.
Oh, yeah. So on the topic of final battles, I have only ever participated in one, and it's the latest one, G9. Because every other time I've died before I can reach that
Sometimes
point.
twice.
But yeah,
So what about your finishing move in G9?
Oh, yeah. So, as I said before, I had found this spaceship in Antarctica, um, and decided to launch it, because it was 4 miles long, and I decided I couldn't just ask Real for rooms to find and him tell me if they were there
With
or
4 miles of
not. So I
space.
just decided to
Sorry.
use it for. Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, with 4 miles of space, I was going to run out of ideas very quickly without creating some sort of
Yeah.
way for you to be heavily overpowered compared to everybody else with just one thing.
So since that wasn't an option, I decided to use it for space travel, right?
Mhm.
Um, until suddenly I get told that me taking this spaceship and basically stealing it when I thought it was just friendly borrowing, um, unleashed this monster in the Atlantic. um, and I thought it fitting that this very spaceship that awoke the monster was the one that finished it, because uh, in a very Star Wars manner, I activated the warp drives and obliterated the monster out of the face of the Earth.
Mhm.
And who knows if we teleported somewhere out of the pure energy that created, but who knows?
Well, I don't think you would have survived that because it just kinda because anybody who's seen the actual scene from Star Wars, there's no way that woman survived that. So I don't really know if it'd be possible since you were going, like, into the ground and all that was left was a crater, and the monster was just it was just completely gone. There was nothing left of it. So I don't think you would have survived. But,
That's
yeah.
true. Yeah, but um, for the sake of plot armor and Noah's and Cran's love story, it could be a possibility.
I forgot about that. Um, yeah, that's an interesting thing. Um, Pseudo is the only person to ever get a buff called Alien Romance because he tried to seduce a Canite, which was basically it was going to be like the villain alien of the game, but it ended up not being that way because the investigation into it just kind of took a hard U-turn into working together to stop the world from blowing up. And also, Game 9, I think I did a pretty good job at giving subtle hints every once in a while. Or I like to have that kind of thing because, um, like having the subtle hints, I've well, at the time of making these games with the Earth series, I've been watching a lot of analog horror, which is basically like older TV style videos that are of normally a broadcasting company or a news station that end up showing like they're either hijacked or they're just part of a much darker thing. For example, Local 58, they're a basically corrupt news station that shows a lot of dark things. And towards the end, there's this video called Skywatching, which is which towards the end, if you look really closely, you can see there's something not quite right with the moon, which basically the whole series is showing there's something going on with the moon, which is it's being eaten by this unknown space creature. And if you look at it, you're basically hypnotized to follow everything it does or everything it says. So in the national games, I kind of like having that sort of background quiet plot that you don't exactly know of while you're doing your own thing. So, this sort of rose with Game 5 with the establishment of the European Confederation, which, once it grew to be basically worldwide, was renamed to the United Confederation of Great Britain because it originated in the United Kingdom. So, through Game 5, it rose. In Game 7, it introduced Prime, which was the robot division, which was actually developed by the Canaanites because the humans hadn't really done that well, except for the American models, because the American models were made by the players. So you guys ended up causing I say you guys, but it's actually none of you, ended up causing their own demise. And then Game 7 started basically the whole thing was a simulation, like a real life simulation, sort of similar to Portal. So in Game 7, everybody was kind of fighting for each other while the United Confederation of Great Britain was watching to see. It was basically a giant test to see how humanity would act when put under an apocalyptic scenario. So to do this, they hacked into all of the US missiles and robots and all that, and turned it against the people to create basically a controlled apocalypse. So eventually, Delta Scientifics, Frogtown, and the Republic of the Pacific found out about this, and they put a stop to it, with also some help from Arnak, which helped in the final battle some. Mostly as an ally, but they helped. So that was the small piece in Game 8. In Game 9, it sort of comes to an end as everybody starts to figure out what's going on, what's actually been happening. Because it doesn't make too much sense to have a nation just suddenly change their entire ideology and government type overnight, like Great Britain did. So, towards the end, with Pseudo and the Arkansas Academia, he found an old ship in Antarctica after trying to find a reason to why there was suddenly a giant crater in the South Pole, which was caused by Delta with their giant space laser that ended up getting nuked on the moon. And he eventually, with the help of a research team, Arkansas was able to raise the ship out of the ice, sort of like a reverse Captain America. And meanwhile, up in the northern Atlantic, Delta had started to look for, quite literally, Atlantis as a joke, but I thought, hey, this could work, so I gave him Atlantis. Except it wasn't really the Atlantis that you think of, like the whole beautiful city of ruins that looks like it's kind of Greek or Roman kind of style. It was some ruins under the ocean, but there was also this sort of tower involved. This tower had, like, sort of industrial markings on it, marking A something, but A stood for Atlantis, which wasn't really revealed all that much, but it meant Atlantis. And there was also this light pointing to the south. And then once the ship rose, another thing. No, actually, this was after. After the ship rose, the tower basically activated, and the light started to blink, and the tower itself started to pulse, which revealed a hidden sort of poem, I guess, that I wrote that I cannot remember. But basically, the whole thing that Delta had found out was once the ship had risen, so would the demise of the planet. However, Arkansas and Delta were not in contact with each other at this time, so they didn't know what was going on. Arkansas didn't know that Delta had found something, and Delta didn't know that the ship had risen. So, me kind of taking into with experience of these people playing, I knew somebody would start talking to somebody else for help pretty soon after, so I was hoping that they'd eventually call each other, which they ended up doing somewhat after Arkansas arrived to the tower, because I was kind of pushing you guys to meet together towards the end, because I didn't know if you guys would even do it, and Delta definitely would not have been able to actually defeat that monster on his own. Like, whether you're powerful or not, nah. Because you did fire at it twice with a planet-destroying laser, and it still didn't die. But anyway, basically all that. The ship was made by the Canaanites, which had taken over Great Britain, and they had also, once they arrived on the planet, they released a beast into the depths of the earth, and then hit it with that tower, so it wouldn't wake up until the tower was open to the open air. And long story short, again, I say this way too often still. Anyway, after a while, there was the final battle, which ended recently still. They basically fought the beast over the Atlantic Ocean and parts of Africa, and it ended with the hyperdrive kill. And that was basically the whole story of the United Confederation of Great Britain, abridged. About, I want to say, yeah, it would have been about 500 or so years, because they arrived in the mid. Oh, that was another thing. In 2019, during the battle with the Egyptian Empire, that was when the European Confederation had emerged. Arkansas had found a British Antarctic base that had some files on missing people from like 500 years before they had found it. 500 years before would be 2019, roughly. I'm kind of BSing the dates. It's 501, but that doesn't matter. But basically, with some more research, they found some partially hidden news about a lot of disappearances and murders and things like that, which was hidden by the Egyptian Empire, basically World War III. And because of that, the European Federation was able to rise into power, and causing basically the rest of the games to be able to happen. Any thoughts of knowing the full story now?
It definitely makes much more sense. Because, like I said before, when I was sending Real to look for every room in the ship, he sent me the randomness stuff. Like in my point of view, there was the Declaration of Independence, the Queen's Crown.
Yep.
And a Staros, which was a fictional animal that the Republic of the Pacific made.
Yep.
And I hadn't connected all the dots, and I just thought, oh, he just wants me to find treasures by the aliens because they're controlling the humanity. But yeah.
There was also the balloon.
Oh, the balloon. What was the balloon?
You never actually opened it up. So if you would have, think of when Turch is having some issues, so he'll be back in a moment. when you found the actual balloon, it was Thanksgiving. And I was watching the Thanksgiving Day parade. So it's Tom the Turkey, which is basically Macy's Thanksgiving mascot every year. And it's a giant turkey balloon that sits on top of the Macy's canopy in New York. So that was a little sort of festive Easter egg, which I don't really have too many Easter eggs. But yeah, that's an American thing, so I'd try to do some more with outside of America, but I don't know as much once it gets outside of America. So yeah. Any things that like, are there any items that you guys have enjoyed being able to find?
I
Let me think.
I tried to talk before, but I don't think my microphone worked. I was talking about how
No,
the
yeah.
plot,
Hmm?
like how in the games we start only with a like ground, like a basic lore, and we
Mm-hmm.
develop from our own decisions, like how Delta was meant to die in G8, but from the route I took, I changed my fate and I still lived on through the ninth game, you know? So I really like how
Mm-hmm.
there isn't any set way for us to go. I can make a nation and do something I want, and depending on what I do, my fate will change and I won't really need to follow a single path.
Mm-hmm. And Sudo?
And as for me, it was in G8, I think, where I played the Candy
Mm-hmm.
Kingdom, and there I was since it's a post-apocalyptic world, I was finding all these radioactive stuffs, um, ranging from glow in the dark piss to
I forgot about that.
to yeah, to strawberry fish and mutant alligators. So that was really fun.
Yeah. Um, Speaking of your strange findings, I usually tend to kind of get extra weird whenever Pseudo plays because he's creative, so I know he's not gonna get really confused when realism is just thrown out the window. But it kind of leads into my next question that I just kind of thought of now. Who are you guys' favorite characters that you've met, or either characters or NPCs?
For me, there's all the receptionists you make up.
Yeah.
Mainly the Garfield one, who just hung up after I asked her if she wanted some lasagna. Um, Uh, there's Amber, the recently named AI of the spaceship I found. Um, so Amber here decided to get an attitude when I was asking her stuff. So
Just so you know,
yeah,
Amber's a
it's
guy. Yeah, you never
oh
asked, so that's why he was so angry because you named him Amber, and then he's like this warrior that binded himself to the ship like hundreds of years ago, and you named him Amber, which just makes it even better. It's like
uh,
just the
um,
quiet stuff that didn't actually really get told about.
yeah, and of course Kren, which was the Kenite reel whipped up for me, who had to confusedly sit through an entire magic show which I was making up on the spot.
Yeah, to be honest, that confused me
Yeah.
too. Like, not just the character. I was just completely confused. I'm like, what kind of show is this? This isn't even magic at this point. It's just weird.
Yeah. It was the shittiest magic you've ever seen. It was just, yeah.
It's like, holy crap! What is this? A soap opera with this with the musical instruments? Like, why is everyone dying? Is it an Infinity War again? But yeah. I think I'm really out of questions now because I don't know. I think it's been almost an hour too. That's got to be the longest podcast episode I've made. But yeah, I I don't really have any other questions. Do either of you, and Church, if you can still hear me, do you, and there he goes. Okay, yep, his phone really isn't working. Okay, Pseudo, you're still here. Do you have any questions for me? Yeah.
Yay!
Do you have any questions about the games for me that I could possibly answer or think of an answer that I don't have one for?
For the games,
Yeah.
what's the direction? Are you thinking of a direction the games are taking, or will G9 be the end of the Earth series?
With that whole plot line, I could, but I had an idea of potentially turning the um potentially turning off, or if I can actually think before I speak. Um because of the final battle and you guys shooting what is basically the equivalent of the Jeddah City destruction from Rogue One, um, like multiple times at something, and all the, like, I want to say it was 10 ICBMs fired in the same place, and basically incinerating a city. Um, all of that in reality would most likely kill the planet, but I'm thinking of with how I had ended game 9 with speaking of the earthquakes and all the stuff going on, volcanoes erupting. That could either be taken two ways, and I haven't really decided which way I want to take it, because one way is that series is over. This is completely done. The second way is that we could go further into the future to a year I haven't determined yet, where basically it's like continental drift again, where the planet is all sorts of screwed up. But the main issue with that kind of thing happening is I have to try to make a map that is uh, actually fitting to the actual game. So I don't have a sort of, like, my best bet would be to choose something like Pangea, but I don't know if there's any editable maps like Pangea, or if I would have to go back to using a previous map creator like I had. Because my two main map creation sources are map charts, which is what I made the Earth series out of, because they have basically every state and province on Earth, and for the United States, they have every single county, which has helped with making less blocky sort of advancements. Like in battle, I like to see like slow movement or like increasement of land over time, instead of like, there was one battle, you took the entirety of Texas in that one battle. That's not realistic. So I used the sort of counties to make a more divided sort of feel. But which is kind of ironic with the United States of America. But I don't really know if that's one I can do if I were to do a continental drift, because I don't believe there are any maps based off of that. My other map, or map creator, I mean, that I use is called Asgar's Fantasy Map Creator, which I'm not sure how well I'd be able to use that to make another Earth sort of thing, because those are just kind of randomly generated fantasy maps. Like they randomly generate continents, nations, everything. So I don't know how well that would fit the far future, because it's all like fantasy slash medieval based. So it really depends on how well I can make a map. And I really don't want to go back to what I did in Planet of Nations and do it on Google Drawings, because that just looked absolutely horrible. I was trying, but it didn't look too great, and it didn't go far. Because it's really hard to like edit things in Google Drawings in a way that doesn't look like a 5-year-old made it.
Yeah, I can see that. And kind of a last question. Um, the the national games are very, serious, political, scientific. Would you ever consider making one of your games be in a fantasy setting?
You joined a little bit later, but the earlier national games were basically all fantasy sort of things. Well, some were fantasy, some were just kind of earlier on. Um, the beginning of the national games, when it was still called Nations Roleplay, the first game was, actually, now I think about it, no, that was not fantasy, but the fantasy map creator I used a lot, so it seemed like more fantasy style, but a mix of fantasy and like 1950s futuristic stuff. But some things were sort of fantasy, but I will try to do some of that. Fortunately, well, I say fortunately, but it's not exactly the same now that I think about it. With Erica's game, it's not exactly fantasy, it's mythology, but to us, it's sort of fantasy because we don't see a lot of the stuff that is in that game physically. So it's sort of a fantasy. But I can try making some sort of fantasy games. I would just need a little bit of time to think of something.
Yeah, I'd definitely be interested in it.
Yeah. Um so unless you have any other questions, I think we can finish this off.
Okay, no, my questions. I'm all out of questions for now.
Yeah. And I'm all out of questions because I think I asked them all. Um so yeah. Uh Thank you everybody for listening to this podcast. And thank you, Pseudo, to be for being in this podcast. If I can speak English, it's my native language, and these guys are doing it better than I can. Um, but yeah, thank you for being on the podcast. And Turch's internet is not being his friend right now, and he's gone. But if Turch is listening, thank you for being on the podcast. And most likely, I'm going to be thanking you in chat after the recording ends anyway. But thank you both for being on the podcast, and I hope you're all enjoying the national games. And yeah,
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a pleasure.
anytime you'd want to make a podcast, I'm fine with it because I don't get a lot of ideas, and this is only like the 6th episode. So yeah, anybody who ever wants to talk, let me know on Discord, and I'm fine making a podcast with you. Probably if I know you well, can just have a conversation or something. But yeah, that is basically all for Reilious' world today. I hope you all enjoyed this podcast episode, and I hope you all have a good day. This is Reilious signing out. See you guys.